Welcome to a narrated virtual tour that takes you through the evolution of U.S. bombers, starting with the 1920 Martin MB-2 through the Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit. The tour involves aircraft that I personally photographed or videoed, mostly at the Air Force, Navy, or Smithsonian Air Museums. Enjoy the video. The Martin MB-2 was the first U.S.-designed bomber produced in large numbers and became the Air Service's primary multi-engine bomber. It was flown with a 4-man crew and was armed with 5 machine guns, 2 in the bow position, 2 in the upper rear fuselage, and 1 in the lower rear fuselage. It sacrificed speed and maneuverability so they could carry heavy bomb loads up to 1,800 pounds internally and 2,000 pounds externally on 8 hardpoints. The aircraft wings had hinges and notches just outside of the engine nacelles that allowed the wings to swing back for easier storage inside hangars. This MB-2 is a reproduction that was completed in 2002 using original Martin drawings. When delivered to the Naval Fleet in October 1932, the Curtiss-Wright BFC-2 Ghost Hawk was a single-seat biplane armed with 2 30mm machine guns, providing air-to-air capability. It could carry either a 500-pound bomb beneath its fuselage or a quartet of 112-pound bombs underneath the wing. The bombs provided an air-to-ground capability that made the Ghost Hawk the Navy's first true fighter bomber. Originally designated F-11C-2, the redesignation to BFC-2 denoted that it possessed both bombing and fighting mission capabilities. The only Navy squadron to fly the Ghost Hawk was the Hi-Hats, flying from the carrier Saratoga. The Naval Air Museum's Ghost Hawk was restored over a 3-year period and is displayed with the Hi-Hat markings. Martin's B-10 was the first modern all-metal monoplane bomber produced in quantity and served between 1934 and the late 1930s. It carried 3 50-caliber machine guns, 1 in the nose and 1 each in the dorsal and ventral positions, and could carry a bomb load of up to 2,260 pounds internally. It had a crew of 4, the pilot and 3 gunners. It featured such innovations as retractable landing gear, a rotating gun turret, and enclosed cockpits. Its advanced design made them 50% faster than contemporary biplane bombers and was as fast as most fighters. This speed convinced many Army Air Corps planners that bombers could successfully attack strategic targets without long-range fighter escorts. However, it was obsolete by the start of World War II. The aircraft displayed at the Air Force Museum is an export version sold to Argentina and is the last remaining B-10. The Douglas B-18 Bolo was a military variant of the commercial Douglas DC-2, built as a replacement for the Martin B-10. It was Douglas's first medium bomber design. It had a crew of 6, pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, and 3 machine gunners. The 3 30-caliber machine guns were located in the nose, dorsal position, and ventral position. Its payload consisted of up to 4,500 pounds of internally held bombs or depth charges. Despite being equipped with inadequate defensive armament and underpowered, the Bolo remained the Air Corps' primary bomber into 1941. When improved bombers, such as the B-17, replaced Bolos in early 1942, many were used as transports or modified for anti-submarine duty. This Air Force Museum's aircraft is painted as a B-18A, serving with the 38th Reconnaissance Squadron in 1939. The December 1937 delivery of Vought Sikorsky's SB-2U was an important technological step for naval aircraft. It was the service's first monoplane scout bomber, and its speed eclipsed its predecessors by 45 miles per hour. But its truss fuselage and fabric construction were obsolete by the beginning of World War II, prompting its replacement by newer designs that incorporated the metal stress skin construction technique. It was flown by a crew of 2, pilot and gunner, armed with 2 30 caliber machine guns, one in the right wing and one for the gunner. The Vindicator carried either a single 500-pound or 1,000-pound bomb under the fuselage centerline. It served on several carriers throughout the fall of 1942, and some served in Marine Corps squadrons through the Battle of Midway, where they saw its only combat. Of the 12 Vindicators that took part in the battle, 6 were lost and 5 were severely damaged by either enemy fire or by exceeding the aircraft's operational limits. One of the lost aircraft was flown by Captain Richard Fleming, who pressed home his bombing run despite his aircraft being in flames. Killed in action, he received the posthumous Medal of Honor. There were few Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses in service on December 7, 1941, but production accelerated after the U.S. entered World War II. They served in every combat zone, but it is best known for its daylight strategic bombing of German industrial targets. It had a 10-man crew, pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, flight engineer, and 5 gunners. It was a relatively fast, high-flying, long-range bomber with heavy defensive armament at the expense of bomb load. A total of 11 or 12 50 caliber machine guns protected against all potential enemy attack angles, and it could carry an internal 17,600-pound bomb load. It developed a reputation for toughness based upon stories and photos of badly damaged B-17s safely returning to base. Of approximately 1.5 million tons of bombs dropped on Axis territory by U.S. aircraft, over 640,000 tons were dropped by B-17s. They were introduced in 1938, but quickly phased out after the end of World War II. The aircraft displayed at the Air Force Museum is the famed B-17F Memphis Belle, the first heavy bomber to return to the U.S. after flying 25 missions over Europe. First-generation Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers deployed late in 1940 and early 1941, and by the time the U.S. entered World War II, 10 squadrons operated the SBD. It incorporated perforated dive flaps that stabilized it during bombing runs of over 70 degrees. They were flown by a 2-man crew, the pilot and the gunner. 2 50 caliber forward-firing machine guns plus 2 30 caliber rear cockpit trainable machine guns defended the Dauntless, while up to 2,250 pounds of bombs or depth charges were carried externally in 3 hard points. Though the plane was relatively slow and lightly armed, SBD pilots and gunners shot down 138 enemy aircraft. It was the frontline Navy and Marine Corps dive bomber at the onset of the Pacific War and served in combat throughout the war, though in decreasing numbers as it was supplanted by the MB-2 Helldiver. Dauntlesses teamed up with TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, sinking 4 Japanese carriers during the battles of Coral Sea and Midway. The SBD Dauntless, displayed at the National Naval Aviation Museum, is a survivor of the attack on Pearl Harbor and participated in dive bombing runs against Japanese carriers during the pivotal Battle of Midway, making it one of the most historic aircraft in existence. The Brewster SB-2A Buccaneer had a 2-man crew, the pilot and a gunner, but it was a classic failure. Armament consisted of 2 50 caliber machine guns in the engine cowling, 4 30 caliber machine guns in the wings, while the gunner controlled 2 30 caliber machine guns. It could carry up to 1,000 pounds of munition housed in an internal bay. It was found to be unsatisfactory and was never used in combat, but instead became trainers, target tugs, and ground maintenance trainers. Some of the latter Buccaneers went directly from the assembly line to the scrap heap. Only 2 examples exist. The one shown here is at the National Naval Aviation Museum, and the other is at the Pima Air Museum in Tucson, Arizona. The Consolidated B-24 Liberator was the most produced U.S. aircraft during World War II and was the first American bomber with tricycle landing gear. The crew consisted of a pilot and co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, radio/radar operator, and gunners, 7 to 10 men total. Liberators were armed with 10 50 caliber machine guns and could carry up to 8,800 pounds of conventional ordnance in its bomb bay. They are best known for the raid on the Palesti oil field that supplied approximately 60% of Germany's oil needs. Staggering waves of 178 Liberators were met by coordinated German anti-aircraft fire and fighters, losing over 50 while the refinery lost little production. Long-range Liberators armed with radar systems protected Allied Atlantic convoys, spotting and attacking German U-boats on the surface or at periscope depth, sinking at least 72. In the Pacific theater, its long range also made it suitable for flying long, overwater missions and missions over the Himalayas, referred to as flying the hump. It served in several branches of the American Armed Forces as well as several Allied Air Forces and Navies. The B-24D, displayed at the Air Force Museum, flew combat missions from North Africa in 1943 and 44. The North American B-25 Mitchell medium bomber was originally intended for level bombing from medium altitudes, but the Pacific's jungle environment made low-level attack the better tactic. The Mitchell was used extensively in the Pacific theater for bombing Japanese airfields and beach emplacements from treetop levels and for strafing and skip bombing enemy shipping. It had a crew of 6, pilot, co-pilot, and tail gunner, while the navigator/bombardier, radio operator, and flight engineer doubled as gunners. Field-modified B-25s and production versions featured a solid nose that housed 8 fixed 50 caliber machine guns or one 75mm cannon for low-level attack. It also had an additional 10 or 12 50 caliber machine guns and could carry up to 3,000 pounds of bombs in its bomb bay. Its sturdy construction enabled it to absorb tremendous punishment and return home. After the war, many remained in service, operating across 4 decades, with the last Mitchells retired in the U.S. in 1960 and from Indonesia in 1979. The Mitchell displayed at the Air Force Museum was an RB-25D that was reconfigured by North American Aviation as the lead B-25B flown by Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle on the famous Tokyo raid. Martin's B-26 Marauders first flew combat missions in the Southwest Pacific in the spring of 1942, but most were subsequently assigned to Europe and the Mediterranean. After entering service, Marauders quickly gained the reputation of widowmakers due to the early models having high accident rates during takeoff and landing. However, bombing from medium altitudes of 10,000 to 15,000 feet, it had the lowest loss rate of any Allied bomber, less than 0.5%. By the end of World War II, Marauders flew more than 110,000 sorties and dropped 150,000 tons of bombs. The crew consisted of a pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, radio operator, navigator, dorsal turret gunner, and tail gunner. 11 machine guns protected the Marauder as it carried an internal payload of up to 5,200 pounds of bombs or aerial torpedoes. The Air Force Museum's Marauder, shooting in, is painted as a 9th Air Force B-26B in 1945. During the Battle of Midway, 6 Grumman TBF Avengers attacked the Japanese fleet but were mauled by enemy fires. 5 were shot down and the surviving aircraft was badly damaged, with 1 crew member dead and 1 wounded. The heavily damaged Avenger provided valuable information that led to improvements to its combat survivability. Avengers had a 3-man crew: pilot, bombardier, and rear gunner. Standard armament had two 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings, one 50 caliber machine gun in the dorsal turret, and one 30 caliber rear-facing machine gun in the ventral gun position. It could carry one Mark 13 torpedo in an internal bay, 4 500 or 12 100-pound bombs, and later versions supported up to 12 5-inch unguided rockets mounted on hardpoints. Later in the war, with the U.S. Navy having complete air superiority, Avengers contributed to the sinking of two Japanese super battleships, Musashi and Yamato. Once baby flat tops escorted Allied convoys, Avengers dealt with German U-boats and provided air cover for the convoys. They were one of the most effective sub-killers, claiming about 30 submarine kills, including the cargo submarine I-52. Avengers manufactured by General Motors were designated TBMs. U.S. Navy dive bomber squadrons flew Curtiss SB-2C Helldivers against Imperial Japan beginning in November 1943 and continued until the end of the war. Changes in carrier tactics, technology, and weapons made the dive bomber obsolete as the war progressed, making the Helldiver the last dive bomber operated by the U.S. Navy. Its crew consisted of the pilot and one tail gunner. Initial models had four 50 caliber forward-firing machine guns, while later versions were equipped with a pair of 20mm cannons in the wings, plus two 30 caliber machine guns in the rear cockpit. It carried up to 2,000 pounds of bombs, or one Mark 13 torpedo in an internal bay, plus up to 500 pounds of bombs on two hardpoints. As of 2013, the National Air and Space Museum's Helldiver is one of 7 surviving SB-2Cs that are either complete and in museums or undergoing restoration. The Douglas B-26 Invader's original designation was A-26 when it was a World War II attack aircraft used for level bombing, ground strafing, and rocket attacks. Then it was redesignated as the B-26 in 1948. Invaders had a 3-man crew, the pilot, a navigator/loader, and a gunner. Its armament was all 50 caliber machine guns, 2 in the nose, 6 in the wings, and the dorsal and ventral barbettes had 2 remote-controlled machine guns each. Invaders could carry 4,000 pounds of internal and an additional 8,000 pounds of external payload. During the Korean War, it played an important part in the U.S. forces' interdiction campaign against communist ground forces. Invader crews initially flew during the day, but the MiG-15's arrival forced them to fly most missions at night. Early in the Southeast Asia War, the Invader returned to action for the 3rd time, performing special air warfare missions. The Air Force Museum's B-26K Counter-Invader was one of the first 6 to arrive in Southeast Asia in 1966. Boeing's B-29 Superfortress was the most sophisticated propeller-driven bomber to fly during World War II, and it was the first bomber to house its crew in pressurized compartments. The standard Superfortress had 5 remotely controlled gun turrets on the fuselage, each equipped with 2 50 caliber machine guns. Gunners used computerized aiming sights, and each gunner could control 2 or more turrets to concentrate firepower on a single target. They flew with 11 crew members: the pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, flight engineer, radio operator, and 5 gunners. Conventional bomb capacity was 20,000 pounds carried in internal bomb bays. The Army Air Force moved B-29s to the Marianas, and they began bombing Japan in December 1944, employing high-altitude precision bombing tactics that yielded poor results. Bombing computers could not compensate for the high-altitude winds, and the weather was so poor that visual target acquisition was rarely possible. In March 1945, Major General Curtis LeMay ordered the group to change tactics from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude night strikes with incendiary bombs. Hundreds of superfortresses carried out these firebombing raids, crippling much of Japan's industrial and economic infrastructure. Late in 1944, Army Air Force leaders selected the Martin assembly line to produce a squadron of B-29s codenamed Silverplate. Martin modified these superfortresses by removing all gun turrets except for the tail position, removing armor plate, installing Curtiss electric propellers, and modifying the bomb bay to accommodate either the Fat Man or Little Boy version of atomic bombs. On August 6, 1945, Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, Jr., in command of Superfortress Enola Gay, dropped the Little Boy atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. Following the dropping of a second atomic bomb, this one on Nagasaki by Superfortress Boxcar, Japan accepted Allied terms for unconditional surrender. The staff at Paul E. Garber facility began working to preserve and restore Enola Gay in December 1984. This project lasted nearly 2 decades and took approximately 300,000 work hours to complete. In June 1948, the Strategic Air Command received its first operational Convair B-36 Peacemaker, a strategic bomber with intercontinental range. The Peacemaker had a crew of 15 and was the first bomber capable of delivering any U.S. nuclear weapon and could carry up to 88,000 pounds of conventional or nuclear weapons inside its 4 bomb bays. Its defensive armament consisted of 2 20mm automatic cannon in both the nose and tail that were later deleted, and 12 20mm automatic cannons in the fuselage. It was the only American aircraft with the range and payload capacity to carry such bombs from airfields on American soil to targets in the USSR, becoming a major deterrent to enemy aggression. B-36 bomber variants conducted training and test operations, but they were never used offensively as bombers against hostile forces. Peacemaker RB-36 variants, not shown, were used for reconnaissance during the Cold War. It was retired from service in February 1959, replaced by B-52s. North American's B-45 Tornado was the first American 4-engine jet bomber to fly, the first American production jet bomber, the first jet bomber capable of carrying an atomic bomb, and the first multi-jet reconnaissance aircraft to refuel in midair. Tornadoes had a crew of 4, the pilot, a co-pilot, a bombardier navigator, and a tail gunner. It was armed with 2 50 caliber machine guns and could carry up to 22,000 pounds of ordnance. From 1952 to 1958, tornadoes based in England were a key nuclear deterrent against the Soviet ground attack in Europe. North American built 142 B-45s, including 10 long-range B-45Cs with wingtip fuel tanks and 33 RB-45Cs configured for high-altitude photo reconnaissance and aerial refueling. RAF B-45 crews flew highly classified reconnaissance missions deep into communist territory. The aircraft on display at the Air Force Museum is painted in the markings of the 47th Bomb Wing. North American's AJ-2 Savage was designed to be the first nuclear bomber for the U.S. Navy. It was flown by a 3-man crew, had 2 20mm cannon, and could carry up to 12,000 pounds of conventional or nuclear weapons. When first deployed in 1950, the North American AJ Savage was so large and heavy that it could only be used on Midway-class aircraft carriers. It was not popular aboard ships as it was so big and cumbersome that it complicated other flight operations. Early in its career, squadrons would typically forward deploy at land bases, then be flown on board the aircraft carrier when required. The Savage was adapted to perform other missions, including photo reconnaissance and as airborne tankers. The Boeing B-47 Stratojet was an essential component of the U.S. Air Force Strategic Air Command during the 1950s and early 60s. It had a crew of 3, the pilot, co-pilot, and navigator/bombardier. Defensive armament began with 2 remotely controlled 50 caliber machine guns that were later replaced with 20 mm cannons and could carry 2 nuclear or up to 28 500-pound bombs. The Air Force Museum's aircraft is an RB-47H reconnaissance variant. It would fly in radio silence at night along and sometimes over the borders of the Soviet Union and other communist nations, collecting essential intelligence about the size and capability of Soviet air defense radar networks. They remained in service until the more capable RC-135 replaced them in the mid-1960s. After becoming operational in 1955, Boeing's B-52 Stratofortress was the main long-range heavy bomber of the U.S. Air Force during the Cold War, and it continues to be an important part of the bomber force today. It has 5 crew members, a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, electronic warfare officer, and radar navigator/bombardier. It can carry up to 51,570 pounds of ordnance, 20 internal and 2 external cruise missiles, free-fall bombs, anti-ship, air-to-surface missiles, and joint direct attack munitions. A Stratofortress made the first airborne hydrogen bomb drop over Bikini Atoll on May 21, 1956, but has dropped only conventional munitions in combat. It entered combat in Southeast Asia in June 1965 and by August 1973 had flown 126,615 combat sorties with 17 lost to enemy action. After Vietnam, B-52s were modernized with new weapons, equipment, and both offensive and defensive avionics. B-52 strikes were an important part of Operation Desert Storm as a flight of B-52s flew from Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, refueled in the air en route, struck targets in Iraq, and returned home, a journey of 35 hours and 14,000 miles round trip. They contributed to Operation Enduring Freedom in 2001, providing the ability to loiter high above the battlefield and provide close air support using precision-guided munitions, a mission which previously would have been restricted to fighters and ground attack aircraft. B-52s played a role in Operation Iraqi Freedom when, during the night of March 21, 2003, they launched at least 100 cruise missiles at targets within Iraq. The Air Force Museum's B-52 saw extensive service in Southeast Asia and was severely damaged by an enemy surface-to-air missile on April 9, 1972. In March 1951, the U.S. Air Force contracted with Martin to build the British Canberra in the United States under license. The B-57 Canberra is one of only 2 major foreign-designed combat aircraft adopted for use in the United States military since the end of World War II. It has a 2-person crew, a pilot, and a navigator. The original armament was 8 50mm machine guns, changed later to 4 20mm cannon in the wings. Its bomb load was up to 4,500 pounds of internal and up to 2,800 pounds of external ordnance on 4 hardpoints. 2 Martin B-57 Canberra squadrons were sent to South Vietnam in 1965. They flew many mission types, including close air support and night interdiction in Southeast Asia until withdrawn in November 1969. The Canberra displayed at the Air Force Museum is configured as it was when assigned to the 8th Bomb Squadron in South Vietnam. The Martin RB-57 Canberra helped fulfill the U.S. Air Force's need for a strategic reconnaissance aircraft that could fly high enough to avoid interception. Perhaps its most noteworthy mission took place on December 11, 1956, when 3 Canberras overflew the city of Vladivostok and the Soviet Union in broad daylight. The resultant Soviet protest led President Dwight D. Eisenhower to end military overflights of the USSR. Note that subsequent U-2 missions were flown by the CIA. The Air Force stopped using it as a strategic reconnaissance aircraft in 1960 due to wing failures, but some Canberras continued flying weather reconnaissance, atomic air sampling, and air defense training missions until it was retired in 1970. The Air Force Museum's RB-57D is painted as it appeared in the late 1950s. Convair's B-58 Hustler was the Air Force's first operational supersonic bomber and was famous for its sonic booms heard when it flew over the United States at supersonic speeds. It had a 3-man crew, the pilot, radar navigator/bombardier, and a defensive systems operator. Its defensive armament was a remotely controlled 20mm rotary cannon with 1,200 rounds located in a tail barbette. The Hustler's thin fuselage prevented it from carrying bombs internally. A droppable 2-component pod beneath the fuselage contained a nuclear weapon along with extra fuel, reconnaissance equipment, or other specialized gear. It entered service in 1960 and flew for a decade with 2 Strategic Air Command bomber wings. The B-58A displayed at the Air Force Museum set 3 speed records while flying from Los Angeles to New York and back on March 5, 1962. The A-3 Skywarrior was designed to serve as a carrier-capable strategic bomber. It is one of only 2 U.S. Navy attack aircraft intended as a strategic bomber that entered full-scale service in that role. It had a 3-man crew, a pilot, a bombardier/navigator, and a crewman/navigator, also known as a 3rd crewman. It was armed with 2 20mm cannon in the tail barbette and could carry up to 12,800 pounds of conventional ordnance or a nuclear weapon. The development of ICBMs and cruise missiles coupled with the size reduction of nuclear weapons made A-3s available for other operations such as an electronic warfare platform, a tactical reconnaissance aircraft, and as a high-capacity aerial refueling tanker. For most of the Vietnam War, EA-3Bs flew from Da Nang Air Base, providing electronic reconnaissance capabilities over the Ho Chi Minh Trail and all the way north to Haiphong Harbor. In these roles, Skywarriors supported the Southeast Asia combat action of the next decade, as well as serving Navy mission needs elsewhere in the world. The last A-3 Skywarriors were removed from naval inventory in March 1991. The Naval Aviation Museum's EA-3 was the last flying example of the airplane known to generation of naval aviation personnel as the Whale. The Boeing B-1B Lancer is one of 3 strategic bombers serving the U.S. Air Force fleet as of 2024. The Lancer has a crew of 4, the aircraft commander, a co-pilot, an offensive systems officer, and a defensive systems officer. It can carry up to 59,000 pounds of conventional and thermonuclear munitions. Its blended wing body configuration, variable wing geometry design, and turbofan engines combine to provide greater range at high speed, more than 900 miles per hour at sea level. Forward wing settings are used for takeoff, landings, and high-altitude maximum cruise. Aft wing settings are used in high subsonic and supersonic flight, which also enhances the aircraft's maneuverability. Its extremely accurate avionics equipment enables the aircrew to navigate accurately around the world without ground-based navigation aids, and it can update target information in flight. Lancers can deliver weapons precisely in a changing combat environment. First used in combat against Iraq during Operation Desert Fox in 1998, the B-1B was also employed in Kosovo and Afghanistan. The U.S. Air Force began reducing its B-1B inventory in 2002 as a cost-saving measure, with 45 still in service as of February 2021. The Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit merged the high aerodynamic efficiency of the flying wing design with composite material, special coatings, and classified stealth technologies. As a result, the B-2 became virtually invisible to even the most sophisticated air defense radar systems. Spirits have a two-person crew, the pilot and the mission commander. It carries up to 40,000 pounds of conventional and thermonuclear bombs, cruise missiles, joint direct attack munitions, and standoff weapons. Spirits demonstrated their combat capabilities in Operation Allied Force over Serbia in 1999, Operation Enduring Freedom over Afghanistan in 2001, and Operation Iraqi Freedom over Iraq. During combat in Kosovo, a Spirit was the first aircraft to deploy GPS satellite-guided smart bombs. The use of smart bombs and precision-guided munitions effectively replaced the controversial carpet bombing tactic, greatly reducing collateral damage. In January 2017, two B-2s attacked an ISIS training camp in Libya, dropping 108 500-pound precision-guided JDAMs, killing around 85 militants. There are 20 B-2 Spirits currently in service, and existing plans have them flying until 2032. I hope you enjoyed this narrated virtual tour through the evolution of U.S. bomber aircraft. If you would like to view similar tours on other aircrafts, please leave a note in the comments section. Links to similar tours will be added to the comments section as they become available. Here are links to similar videos that YouTube recommends.